Today we are lamenting the Broncos' first shutout since 1992. That was before Will Keys was even born. And we're also debating the quarterback situation moving forward. You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented by Mile High Huddle. It's time to drop some knowledge. It's time to exercise some demons. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital. With me is Will Keys, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. Will, my new favorite TV show got canceled, got pulled right out from under me today by ESPN. I don't know how I'm going to be able to go on without Barstool Van Talk.
Well, Chad, I too am devastated with the loss of the beloved Barstool Van Talk. I will say this, it is better to burn out than to fade away. So, one episode is not a full Anthony Scaramucci type term anyway.
Right.
But like I said, it's gonna take on a mythical status. I think that one episode will live in infamy. 23 minutes of content will be with us forever. But I would like to say that because of this, we are no longer going to start our own show at ESPN. The talks are off the table. They're no longer partners with us.
You just can't
sorry
trust
about
that they're going to be there with you for the long haul. We were thinking about taking the Huddle Up Podcast that direction, turning it into a TV show. But we just can't trust that the executives over there would, in fact, back us, unequivocally support us in everything we do. But, it is interesting to see how these major sports media companies are trying to capitalize on what Barstool Sports is doing, and how, they're kind of getting a little too close to the sun. They're getting burned, and then they back away and they get cold feet.
Oh, yeah.
But Barstool, you got to give them props. They're the most unique sports media company, I think, right now in the world. And even though I don't love a lot of their content, so much of what they do, especially on the podcast side, keeps me entertained, keeps me feeding the sports junkie within on the week to week.
Yeah, it certainly entertains me being a 21-year-old college-aged male in the United States. But, they still got great programming. They're still going to be part of my take 3 times a week. Listen to Mixtape if you're an NBA guy. They've got a great baseball podcast, too. I think it's called Starting 9. So when you're not listening to this show, of course.
Absolutely.
Plenty of stuff to listen to over at Barstool.
We have a lot to get to today, but first we want to say thank you to our sponsor, MyBookie.net. MyBookie.net is all about the excitement of making accurate sports predictions on your favorite teams without having to risk any funds. It's totally recreational. There are all kinds of prizes. And in today's climate, let's face it, the fantasy industries have made watching football so much more interesting. The stakes are higher, so go to mybookie.net and compete for great prizes totally free. Now, Huddle Up is here to give you a deep dive on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, and we need your help. Each week, we ask that you take some time, whether you're an iTunes user or Stitcher, and rate the show. Leave a creative review because it helps us to grow. It helps us to reach new listeners. If you haven't done that yet, just take a second and go leave a review on the Huddle Up Podcast. You're subscribing. You might as well leave a review, and it helps us out tremendously. Make sure also you're following the show on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod and Mile High Huddle on Twitter and also on Facebook. We now at 3-3, about almost halfway through the season. Things seem to be going off the rails. Could go up, could go down. You don't know what's going to happen with your Denver Broncos, and you're not going to want to miss a single episode. All right, gang, we just witnessed the first Broncos shutout since 1992. Tommy Maddox was the quarterback. John Elway was injured. I was about 13 years old. I don't think we should lose sight of the historical significance of this dubious feat the Broncos accomplished on Sunday. There's really no need, I think, Will, this week to go through all the particulars, as the game that unfolded in Los Angeles basically happened in a similar fashion as it did the week before versus the Giants. The Broncos turned the ball over 3 times. They got down early. They abandoned the run. And a battered and beat down Trevor Siemian winced his way to yet another terrible performance, while Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram teed off on it, basically. The Broncos' O-line was subpar yet again, but the Band-Aid at right tackle that was Alan Barber was absolutely atrocious. Barber, for what it's worth, was the worst-graded tackle in the league in Week 7, according to Pro Football Focus. He allowed 8 total pressures, including 3 sacks, 1 hit, 4 hurries, on 42 pass-blocking snaps. Siemian was basically under constant duress, and he took an absolutely brutal hit from Melvin Ingram that, frankly, would have killed me. Had I taken that hit, Will, my wife would be planning a funeral right now. But Siemian, he took the 15-yard penalty. He got up. He went back to work, albeit in about as impotent a fashion as possible. For all of the talk, about his baseball frame, his slight frame, etc., Siemian's tough. I'll give him that. He's a tough dude. The Broncos' defense, if we flip the coin, while they did have a few lapses, 4 that I can think of off the top of my head, they played well enough to win. They held Phillip Rivers and company to just 14 points, with the other 7, of course, coming off a Travis Benjamin punt return in the first quarter. And that happened 1 possession after the Broncos. It was a phenomenal feat, stopping the Chargers on downs at the goal line. But as the Bronco offense continues to stink it up, we've worried about yet another locker room rift emerging. We've talked about it. We've written about it at milehighhuddle.com. And it seems, Will, that it's already started a little bit. We're starting to see the cracks in the veneer. Von Miller spoke to it a little bit after the game, a little bit of finger-pointing Chris Harris Jr., and I think it might be happening again before our very eyes. You got the same skill position players, mostly, but you got a new coaching staff, Will. It's mostly a new offensive line. But what's the one common denominator that's left over from last year's, locker room rift? The source of it, anyway. It's Trevor Siemian. And yet, the Broncos are sticking with him again this week. My question, Will, is how do you reconcile that fact, the ineffectual pattern, let's say, that has been established by Bronco offenses captained by Trevor Siemian over the last season and a half that has led to these different locker room tensions? Because I know you are an ardent Siemian guy.
Well, okay, so you talk about the offense not pulling its weight the last 2 years. Well, you could absolutely go back even 3 years to 2015 when they won the Super Bowl. Defense was a little bit better back then, and then obviously the offense, showed glimpses of being capable. If you think like to the first half of that Steelers game under Brock Osweiler, the Packers game with Peyton Manning, and of course this offense has shown flashes too. They're really good, I think, in the first Chargers game under some different circumstances. They didn't have a left guard playing right tackle, and they had Emmanuel Sanders in that game, and then of course the Dallas game where everything was working for them. So to say that the common denominator is Trevor Siemian's pretty misleading.
Well, now, I'll say this though. Let me just say this though about 2015 is that yes, the Bronco offense in 2015 was certainly not what we had come to expect from that unit in the 3 years prior with Peyton Manning. But aside from Peyton Manning's turnovers in, let's say, the first half of the season, once Brock Osweiler got in there, the offense seemed to kind of level out. They had that lapse against the Raiders where Michael Schofield gave up the 5 sacks, but the offense was putting enough points up to keep the Broncos in that condition they need where they're able to prey on the opposing offense. And then once Peyton Manning came back after his injury, they sat Brock Osweiler. At least the Bronco offense, for all of its issues at the time, they weren't turning the ball over and they found a way to run the ball. So I think that's I think he gets that unit, and especially Peyton Manning, is because of the turnovers early on in the season, gets a lot of guff for that particular season, the production of the offense. But I would just say that that's a season that kind of people tend to make a little bit of a mountain, I think, out of a molehill with regard to it being such an atrocious outing by the offense.
I don't know if I necessarily agree. I mean, if you look at Peyton Manning's stat line by the time that Brock Osweiler took over, he had 9 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. Trevor Siemian's only played 6 games, but he hasn't been particularly effective, but he's still got 8 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. So it's not like he's just, sabotaging every chance to win this week.
But still, your point persists. I mean, it has been. This is the 3rd season going on where the Broncos offense has been far from transcendent.
Right. And I think the common denominator in that equation. I'm not saying that he played well the last 2 weeks. He certainly did not. But I defy you to find me more than a handful of quarterbacks that could play well with a sieve at offensive line. Remember, think of the right tackles that they've gone through in the last couple of weeks between Menelik Watson, Billy Turner, and then Alan Barber, who's played 10 or 11 games at right tackle and is a left guard by trade, who was really terrible against, two of the best pass rushers in the game. And then three, if you want to go back to last week and consider JPP. So you take that into account. And then the lack of a running game, which I don't think anybody really has mentioned. I've never said that Trevor Siemian is a quarterback that's going to carry you based on, the strength of his arm alone. And I don't think that there are many of those guys in the NFL, really. And if you can go get a guy like that in the offseason, go for it. I don't think he's on the roster right now. But Trevor Siemian, when he's provided adequate protection, it doesn't need to be perfect, because it wasn't perfect. It certainly wasn't perfect in the first Chargers game, and neither was it in the first the Dallas win either, where they scored 35 points. But they had a running game. And so he wasn't a sitting duck, as the defense couldn't just pin its ears back and go after the quarterback. There's a little bit of a threat of, we gotta stay back. We gotta be disciplined. Jamal Charles could sneak right by me. There's not that anymore. The play calling's been pretty, I don't know, conservative's not really the right word. It's just really uncreative. Well, I saw them. Okay.
Finish your thought. Sorry.
I saw one play where Devontae Booker was split out wide, kind of like what Kyle Shanahan likes to do. He likes to split out a running back out wide to get a mismatch with the linebacker. Siemian hits Booker on a slant. That's a really creative play. Do stuff like that.
Picked up some yardage.
Yeah, don't just drop straight back. And then the final point I'll make is the Demaryius Thomas offensive pass interference call was really weak. And
Agreed.
If that isn't called, the Broncos have a chance to score 14-7 early in the fourth quarter. It's a much different game. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, basically over the last, I'll say 4 weeks, the NFL, the blueprint is out basically on how to defend the Broncos as quarterback by Trevor Siemian, and that is totally load the box on first and second down. Basically sell out everything you can to stop the run, and in so doing, tempt Trevor Siemian to throw it. The Broncos aren't going to do it, but if they do, it's probably going to be under duress. There might be a run blitz that sneaks through on first or second down, but more often than not, what you get is a third and long situation in which Trevor Siemian now has to find a way to make a play. Usually on longer down distances like that, the drops are going to be longer, which means it gives pass rushers more time to get to him. And really what it comes down to, I don't know if you saw this, Will, Cecil Lammey, who I think is a phenomenal football analyst over at 104.3 The Fan, of course. He charts plays. He's like, we're football nerds, but he's like a football geek to the utmost. And he goes through and he charts each game. He charted Trevor Siemian, every throw he made. And if you look at it, every one of those throws, with the exception of, if I can think back, like 2 or 3 maybe, were short of the sticks. And so it's a formula and a blueprint that has held up for opposing teams, which is just stop the run, dare Trevor Siemian to throw it, and on third down, squat at the sticks. Trevor Siemian's going to take what you give him underneath. You swarm, you tackle. And up to this point, neither Siemian nor the Broncos offensive coordinator Mike McCoy has been able to find an answer, or at the very least the team has been unable to execute an answer in a way that's going to propel the offense forward.
Okay. I think that's fair. But also, if you're not given time to throw and you're worried about getting sacked on every play, which he is, and rightfully so, and I think he's kind of developed David Carr syndrome to some extent, where he's thinking guys are there when they're not, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to happen to a young quarterback who's been under pressure basically his whole career. That's kind of the nature of the quarterback position. is you'll kind of develop those demons if you're not taken care of, especially in the first couple years of being a starter. So I don't really blame him for wanting to get the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible. I mean, people tend to complain about him not getting the ball out of his hands quickly, and then when he does and he gets it off to like a running back or something, then people complain that he's throwing short of the stick. So I don't know. It's kind of a no-win situation. I would just say that it's fair to criticize him, absolutely, but he's not. People are acting as though he is the only one worthy of blame. And if you switch out Trevor Siemian with, like they say in baseball, like wins above replacement, if you replace someone with a replacement level league average player, what happens? I don't think that this offense doesn't get better if you replace him and put in, the theoretical league average quarterback. It doesn't turn into, I don't know, the 2013 Broncos or even,
sure,
the 2007 Broncos, I don't think.
Well, the thing with that is you're right. And I wrote about this on Monday at milehighhuddle.com talking about, look, my opinion is the Broncos need to bench Trevor Siemian. Right now, the only option is Brock Osweiler. And there is no guarantee. There's no guarantee that by putting Brock Osweiler in, he's going to be able to play better football than Trevor Siemian. But where I think you and I might disagree on this subject is oftentimes in football, when a quarterback change is made. Because right now, what's the issue in my mind? The biggest issue, really, what it really boils down to, is, I guess what I should say, is the Broncos need a spark on offense. They're not getting it from Trevor Siemian. They're not getting it from anybody else on that team. And an offense lives and dies by the quarterback. And oftentimes, when a quarterback change is made, by virtue of making the change itself, a spark can be created. Because what happens is, let's just go back to 2015. Now, it's slightly different because the quarterback change was originally made because of an injury. You could argue maybe that if Peyton Manning wasn't injured and continued to play that badly, he was going to get benched anyway, and you might be right. But at least in this case, he was benched for Brock Osweiler because of his plantar fascia tear. Well, Brock Osweiler came in, and the offense suddenly started moving. They put up points against the Chiefs. Peyton Manning couldn't get anything going. Brock Osweiler came in the fourth quarter, 14 points. Go on. He went on. The offense picked up from where it was. It kind of snapped out of this lackadaisical daze that it had been in, and all of a sudden started being more consistent and being a little bit more explosive. They won some big games against some tough opponents, including against the New England Patriots, including against the Cincinnati Bengals, who were a very good ball club at the time with the playoffs on the line. And that spark made a difference. Now, in that particular situation, it fizzled toward the end. Brock Osweiler quarterbacked the Broncos in Week 17, five turnovers by the unit, 4 of which were on his shoulders. And Gary Kubiak specifically goes, you know what? This is the time Peyton's healthy. We started Brock because of how well he's done up to this point. Let's forget, it's not, Peyton Manning had to sit. He didn't start Week 17, even though he was healthy, because right. Brock Osweiler had been doing well. But he benched him because he felt like the team needed a spark. So really what I'm getting at is just by virtue of replacing a guy. Now, I'm not saying that Osweiler sucks. I don't believe that. We can talk more about that later on in the show. But what I'm saying is just by virtue of making the change, regardless necessarily of whether that quarterback, if there's empirical evidence to suggest he is better than the guy he's replacing, the change itself can spark an offense. A guy comes in, Brock Osweiler, he's getting his shot, he's excited. It can trickle down. And if there's one thing, Will, that's really bothered me, especially this season about Trevor Siemian, is there's just no fire in him. We've praised him at times for his poise and his calm, cool, collected demeanor. And I think there are times where that's a strength for him. But an offense takes on the emotional complexion of its quarterback. And what we're seeing from this unit is a team that's basically, in my eyes, almost been lulled to sleep. There's no energy. And I think a big reason for that, maybe not the only reason, is that there's no energy coming from Trevor Siemian. We don't see him chase down his receivers when they make a big play or, celebrate on a touchdown. It's been a long time since there was a touchdown, but you get my point. We need to see more fire, and maybe a guy, whether it's Brock Osweiler or even down the road, if it's Paxton Lynch comes in, that new energy and excitement could create a spark. And that's what I feel like right now is most missing from the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I'll debate you a little bit more about that later, I guess, when we talk about Vance Joseph and his decision. Yeah. But I think it's most important that there is one person that agrees with me, at least in the state of Colorado, and that's the head coach.
Yeah, that's right. And let's talk about that. You know, it was a humiliating loss on Sunday. Vance Joseph came out after the game and said that he never entertained the thought of benching Siemian. And then on Monday, following the flight home, some opportunity to study the film, all the meetings, Joseph stood up and he defended Siemian and made it known that he's sticking with him as the starter. Here's what he said.
After looking at the film, you're sticking with Trevor at quarterback?
Absolutely. He's our quarterback.
What are you seeing from him, Vince, in order to stick with him? What is it?
Well, it's not what I've seen from Trevor. It's the entire unit. You know, no one's perfect. You know, he can't play well if he's not being protected. Okay, in certain spots. Now, he hadn't been perfect either. He can play better, absolutely, but it's not a Trevor problem. It's a unit problem. Okay, and yesterday our offensive starting point was -9, -1, -1, -14. We in third and long, probably 8 to 9 times. You know, we can't operate like that when we are facing 2 speed rushers and we're behind the sticks and those guys are just causing havoc. You know, that was not the plan. So, again, offensively, our formula is to run the football, okay, play action pass, and to keep us in manageable third downs. That's where Trevor is comfortable. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is, guys, if he's not being, you know, protected, okay? You know, or the run game's not effective, you know, so we have to do a better job as a unit. It's not just Trevor. I mean, he hadn't played perfect. No one's played perfect. But as a unit, if we get better, he will play better. We've seen it. We've seen it. It's proven. So I'm not concerned about Trevor. It's a unit deal.
All right, Will, so here's my biggest problem with how Joseph is justifying his decision to stick with Siemian. He's making excuses for absolutely atrocious QB play, at least dating back 2 games. And I want to know why. What is causing him so zealously to stick to his guns when the evidence suggests that Siemian is not the same quarterback that he was when the season started? I mean, it's staring him in the face. What he's telling us is that in order for Siemian to be comfortable, in order for Siemian to be effective, he has to have perfect conditions. He's got to have that early lead. He's got to have that productive running game. He's got to have excellent protection, you know, better down and distances, etc., and on down the line. Will, perfect playing conditions, and I'm not talking about the weather, rarely presents themselves in the NFL. At a certain point, the onus falls on the quarterback to carry the team, to find a way to make plays when things aren't going perfectly according to plan. That's what we saw from Peyton Manning. That's what we see every week from the, you know, bona fide NFL franchise quarterbacks like Phillip Rivers, and even in the AFC West, let's keep it there, Alex Smith and Derek Carr. Trevor Siemian, over the last 4 games in which the Broncos have lost 3, has been unable to do that. And I recognize, I do, that it's not all Siemian's fault, the offensive failures. I truly do. But, Will, Siemian has to be the guy to carry the team at times when things go sideways, not the other way around. I mean, that's the way it is in the NFL.
I just don't think that there are that many guys in this league that can carry. Okay, go through it, and then let's figure out who are the guys that can win without an offensive line or a running game to help them out. Because
let's name off names of guys who we think may or may not be able to do better with the Broncos offense as currently constituted.
All right, Aaron Rodgers.
Yes.
Tom Brady.
Yes, of course.
Ben Roethlisberger.
Yes.
Although he is much better, I should say, when he gets a running game, as everybody is.
Yes.
I don't know. I think obviously Derek Carr is a better quarterback than Trevor Siemian, but I don't think he's going to succeed without a running game or an offensive line. Just look at the Broncos and the Redskins games from the Raiders.
Let's fire off some of the younger guys who are still kind of making their legend in the NFL.
Sure.
Let me pose this to you. Jameis Winston.
Maybe. I mean, he has kind of a rare ability to make spectacular plays, both good and bad. So I think that's fair to count. Granted, he is a number 1 overall pick, so that's what should be expected out of that guy.
Marcus Mariota.
I don't think he's that guy.
I agree with
he's pretty. I don't want to use the word fragile, but he's not extremely durable. And the nature of their offense is that it's based on DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry. And they also have two really great tackles in Taylor Lewan and Jack Conklin.
But see, and one thing I think we need to remove from the equation is where guys were drafted. Because at this point, what it is Trevor Siemian is one of 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And so when we're making evaluations, or at least comparing him to other quarterbacks, I mean, that's what he is. He's to his credit, his talent has gotten him that far as a 7th-round pick that frankly would have gone undrafted had Gary Kubiak not stood up, pounded the table, and Elway said, what the heck, let's spend a 7th-round pick on him. So I agree with you, though, on Mariota. I don't think he would be able to hold up. I think you'd see a similar type of spiraling down that we've seen lately from Trevor Siemian. But who else? Let's say even some of the younger guys from last year. Let's say Carson Wentz. How do you think he'd hang in a similar situation?
I think he's closer to Jameis, where he can make something out of nothing.
Right.
But if he's constantly not given protection, like if you look at Carson Wentz's stats with Lane Johnson, who's their right tackle, versus without Lane Johnson, it's a world of difference. And it's another thing we talk about, how important that right tackle position is.
Yeah.
Because I don't know when NFL teams are going to catch on that having a good right tackle is pretty much just as important as having a good left tackle.
Yeah, and in today's NFL, it might even be, or at least in the AFC West, it might even be more important.
Definitely, yeah.
For crying out loud, the Broncos might get to a point where they have to seriously consider moving Garrett Bowles to right tackle because he's their best tackle. He might even be their best, as a rookie, offensive lineman because Matt Paradis, he's solid. He's been solid this year, I'll give him that, but he hasn't been the same player that he was the last 2 years. I hope that changes. I hope it doesn't have anything to do with his hips, but I digress. Maybe, Will, the answer is, and I've heard some buzz on this, the possibility the Broncos could be checking on Houston's tackle, Dwayne Brown, who is held out from all activities. If the Broncos could find a way to get Dwayne Brown in Denver, you could, all of a sudden that would free them up to do whatever they wanted. They could either keep Bowles on the left side or move Bowles to the right side, keep Dwayne Brown there at left tackle, protecting the blind side. I do think, though, Will, they got to do something because no matter who the quarterback is, right tackle has been a sieve, and to use Joseph's own words, it's unacceptable.
I agree. I mean, we heard a ton of rumors out of Buffalo, too, regarding, I think, Cordy Glenn, and then I can't remember what the name of their right tackle is. But yeah, if you can get a guy like Dwayne Brown, I know Joe Staley's been tossed around, and I don't know if Joe Staley's, the best tackle in the NFL anymore. Like he was one of the top 5 guys earlier in his career. And we know San Francisco's kind of doing their little fire sale thing where they're trying to get out with the old, in with the new type of thing under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. But that might be something to take advantage of. But you have to do something. And Menelik Watson, while I think he's better than Alan Barber, I don't think that's saying much to say that you're better at your full-time job than someone is filling in for you. But even Menelik Watson just kind of, as the flatline standard at right tackle is pretty terrifying as a full-time guy. So, I think they kind of swung and missed in free agency. And, it's getting to the point where getting a good tackle is almost like getting a good quarterback, where there's so few and far between that when you see one, you have to jump on it, and you can't just trot anybody out there because it's going to seriously affect your offense. And we've seen that for the last 3 years.
Absolutely. And there's no getting around it. I mean, the Broncos offensive line, whether it's Trevor Siemian, Brock Osweiler, or Paxton Lynch, have to get their you-know-what together. I mean, it's untenable the way they've been performing at least the last 2 weeks. And you could really dial it all the way back to that Week 3 road trip to Buffalo. And we still have a lot to get to, including Step Yo Game Up and the Mile High Mailbag. A lot of questions this week. But first, we want to once again say thank you to our sponsor, MyBookie.net. MyBookie is all about the fun and excitement of making accurate predictions on your favorite teams without having to risk any funds. Site members can make picks against real spreads, real lines, and totals for major sports leagues and associations, as well as college sports, and compete for great prizes, courtesy of MyBookie. MyBookie.net is the greatest, most professional, totally free, and most importantly, 100% recreational sports prediction service you can find on the web. Instead of the typical head-to-head challenges and handicapping contests, MyBookie.net goes beyond the basics and offers members a true betting platform that will make users feel like they were in a real betting site. MyBookie is not a gambling or a play-for-money site. It's a free sports wagering website built for millions of sports fans to provide them with a platform to participate in picking games, predicting scores, and competing for free prizes without risking any money. Just like the Office Pick'em contest, fantasy football, MyBookie brings a deeper enjoyment and excitement to watching our favorite teams by increasing the stakes. It is fun, and for no cost, you get to make predictions and qualify for prizes. Again, the service is absolutely free for all users, and we say thank you to MyBookie for sponsoring the Huddle Up podcast. All right, we're going to get to a few of your questions here in just a minute, but before we do, it's time for Step Yo Game Up. Will, coming off yet another loss, the options are replete with guys who need to turn the ship around, and it's not all Trevor Siemian. You start us off, Will. It can be a player, it can be a unit, a position group, a coach. Who needs to step it up this week in Kansas City?
Yeah, so we haven't really talked about it so far, but the special teams gave up that first touchdown, and that was probably one of the more just mundane, casual, easy punt return touchdowns I've ever seen in my decade or plus of watching NFL football. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to go with Brock Olivo and the special teams. I don't know if that punt return was necessarily all on Brock Olivo, because Riley Dixon hit a punt that was just god-awful. And it's not that it was short or anything. It's that it was low, and it one-hopped right into Travis Benjamin's hands in the middle of the field. Yep. And so it got there quickly. The coverage was not good, but the coverage was also not there yet, so that made matters worse. I don't think Travis Benjamin anybody touched Travis Benjamin on his way to the end zone.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think, this might be hyperbole, but I think Jim Leonard probably could have scored on that one. That actually might be going a little crazy. Give Travis Benjamin a little bit of credit. He's been a Bronco killer over the last 2 years.
He's fast, and you're right, man. His best performances thus far seem to come against the Broncos.
Yeah, just like Antonio Gates. So yeah, I'm going to give it to Brock Olivo. He really needs to step it up against his old team next week, the Kansas City Chiefs, because they have a kick returner that's a little bit better than even Travis Benjamin, and his name is Tyreek Hill. And he's speaking of Bronco killers, he might be, public enemy number one right now in Denver, Colorado, because he had his way with the Broncos last year in every way imaginable. Yeah. Ran for a touchdown, caught a touchdown, returned a punt for a touchdown, a safety kick, I think, actually. And then in the Christmas game, had a long touchdown again, I think, on a screen pass from Alex Smith. So
he's like the new and improved Dante Hall. You guys remember him, Dante Hall? Yeah. Of course. Oh my Lord.
Yeah, he's terrifying. I would compare him to maybe Trindon Holiday if he was a good receiver and didn't fumble, I think is the only way I know how to put it. And that's like an all-world player if you can put all those things together. So definitely Brock Olivo needs to get better. Special teams absolutely has to play well if the Broncos have any shot on Monday night.
Special teams, step your game up. For me, I'm going to point towards the offensive line. And it's not to make excuses for Trevor Siemian per se, but listen, I mean, Will has a very valid point. Anyone with eyes can see it. They've been a sieve. And even Garrett Bowles, who has played very well for most of the season, I mean, he's going to have lapses. He's a rookie. And in their defense, I'll say this for the Broncos offensive line. If you go back and look at each matchup they've had thus far, the edge rushers have been ridiculously talented. I mean, there's a reason why you hear the broadcast talk about Denver's strength of schedule. I mean, they're playing mostly really good teams, and mostly really good teams have excellent edge rushers. And so the Broncos have tried to roll with those punches, mostly to poor results. Now, coming out of such a humiliating loss, I would hope that the Broncos' offensive line takes exception to what's being said about them. In fact, I heard many a conversation today, both on social media, Denver radio, about the hit that Trevor Siemian sustained from Melvin Ingram. I mean, as bad as that was, again, would have killed yours truly. As bad as that was, why didn't we see any Bronco offensive lineman getting fired up? I mean, Garrett Bowles, we hear him talk about, the quarterback is like my wife. You don't touch my wife, you don't touch my quarterback. That's all fine and dandy, Garrett, but when the rubber met the road and your quarterback basically, almost got murdered on the field, what happened? I mean, there's a time and a place where your offensive line has to, step up and protect the quarterback, not just between the whistles, but like in that particular situation, I would have liked to have seen someone, I don't care if it's Garrett Bowles, I don't care if it's Ronald Leary, Matt Paradis, you name it, get into someone's face and react with an equal and opposite type of, aggression. That's what we're missing. Not just from the Broncos O-line, but from the whole team. Offense, I should say. Not the defense. I'm not going to put the defense in that same category. The entire offense right now, they're missing that fire. They need to, and if Trevor Siemian, look, he's the quarterback this week, for better or for worse, and the offensive line needs to coalesce around him, rally behind him, get fired up. I mean, they've become basically the laughingstock of the NFL, and if that doesn't motivate them to turn the ship around, I don't think anything will. Whether it's a quarterback change or not. Now, it's that time of the week where we take a peek inside the Mile High Mailbag. Will and I are honored to be your football priests, and we're here to offer absolution and answers to your burning Broncos questions. And today's first question comes from Aquaman H2O. His question, Will: I have the feeling we will be 3-6 after the next 3 games. Can the Broncos avoid a defense angry at the offense, a divided locker room? And, Will, it's a question on the mind of many, a Broncos fan out there. Your answer for Aquaman H2O, because Vance Joseph remained adamant on Monday that that's absolutely not a problem.
Very good question, Aquaman. I would say that the best way for the Broncos to avoid their defense basically giving them the side eye all week is just to play better. I think that's the only way. They're not going to make the defense, pity them by looking at the injury report or anything, saying, oh, we didn't have Emmanuel Sanders, we don't have a right tackle. The defense has dealt with injuries of their own, definitely, this year. So I don't think there's going to be too much sympathy on the part of the defense. So they just need to play well. And I know the defense is probably – I think a lot of it is they're sick and tired of having to carry the load for 3 years running now. It used to be the other way around. That feels like a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is they're trying to get the offense to take it personally and to say, you know what, I don't want you calling me out, Chris Harris or Aqib Talib or whoever it is. He used to be TJ Ward, but Von Miller, if Von Miller's calling you out, you have problems. So I think the defense is kind of trying to fire them up and egg them on, and they've got to take it personally, and they've got to respond in the best way possible, which is to put up and to perform.
Can the Broncos avoid a divided locker room? The answer is yes, they can, but it's going to require a complete 180. I mean, that's the reality. Coming out of a shutout, I mean, that's the worst possible outcome that the Broncos could have hoped for after losing to a previously winless team 6 games into the season. So, I mean, the only way to go from here is up, basically, is what I'm getting at. And in order for the Broncos to avoid that divided locker room, or for that to grow into something bigger like it was last year, the offense, I concur with Will, they have to put their foot down. I don't give a damn who the quarterback is. That unit has to collectively come together, get fired up, and say, look, we're going to go out there and prove everybody wrong. We're going to be the bullies. We're going to impose our will. But really what it comes down to, I think, in order for the Broncos to not only avoid a divided locker room, but to allow the defense to be who they are and play to their strengths, they got to put points on the board early in the game. They can't wait until the second quarter even. They can't wait until the second half. They have to find a way to make hay early on in games, give themselves a little bit of a lead, even if it's just a field goal, which allows the Broncos offense to play more to their strengths. Now, moving on to the next question. It's kind of a double whammy. Comes from our friend Jacob Smith. He says, why is the coaching staff so bullish on number 13? And how are the Broncos going to help the interior linebacker position with all the injuries? Because it's not all about number 13. We have other issues. And it's kind of, again, two-pronged question there. Jacob, who actually bested me in the Mile High Huddle Fantasy League this week. Damn you, Jacob. I'll take this one first, though, Will. Why are the Broncos so bullish on Siemian? I think, honestly, I've tried to figure this out today. This is Monday. We're tracking this episode. Vance Joseph came out and basically defended Siemian and sticking with him at least this week. And I'm trying to wrap my brain around it because to me, now this is my own opinion, I just don't see any reason why at this point you don't turn away from Siemian looking for any kind of spark. That's how bad it's been the last 2 weeks. So why are they sticking with him? I think it might be because simply they're not confident in Brock Osweiler right now. But if push comes to shove, I think what they're waiting for, if they're going to replace Siemian, is they'll do it with Paxton Lynch. Osweiler, I think, might be viewed really as just an emergency option by the coaching staff. This is the road I've had to go down, trying to explain, trying to justify where this thing is at. That's the only thing I can think of. Osweiler might not be viewed as an emergency option by John Elway, but perhaps that's how Vance Joseph sees him. That's the only explanation in my mind. The Broncos simply fear, I think, their backup options. As for the linebackers, Zaire Anderson received some praise from Coach Joseph on Monday. Anderson, that is, relieved the injured Todd Davis in L.A., and he played pretty well. So depending on Davis's prognosis, the Broncos might have to look, though, at adding an off-ball linebacker. If he's going to be out a couple of weeks, they're going to have to do something, even though they promoted, what's the kid named, Gerald Garcia-Williams off the practice squad. But, Will, your thoughts for Jacob on the two-pronger?
I have to agree with you that if you're going to make a switch, and I'm not advocating it at this point, but if we get a week or two more and the same problems are happening, and the offensive line shows that they're not playing god awful, and that might be a tough thing to pull off against the Kansas City Chiefs. But then I think you would go to Paxton Lynch and not Brock Osweiler. I think Brock Osweiler is kind of redundant at this point. But at least, there's still a bit of an unknown quantity in Paxton Lynch. Certainly what we figured out in the preseason wasn't super encouraging or anything, but you might as well go in on a guy that's,
you got to learn something about him. You got to know what you have in him.
Yeah, I was going to say potential, but that's just such a cliche now. That someone that's just got a little bit of mystery to them, I guess, and a little bit of athleticism. And even if he's, look, like Brock Osweiler is not the guy you want to turn to when you're looking for a finely tuned internal clock at quarterback.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, he's not that guy. So I don't know why people think he's, the answer to everybody's question, although the backup quarterback's always the most popular guy in town until he actually gets in the game. Then you realize why he was a backup in the first place. But at least, you could make the argument that Paxton Lynch would, duck a guy or two and like evade a rusher and get out on the edge and be able to do something with his feet. Even if he's, not seeing the entire field, or he's not throwing the ball on time, or he's staring guys down, at least he provides something where, you can get out of a bad situation and you're not necessarily closed in if you're not getting a clean pocket, which they certainly haven't been recently. As far as linebacker, I was really impressed with Zaire Anderson yesterday. He was kind of, covering the run from sideline to sideline. So it's too bad they lost Todd Davis, who we should point out that first goal line stand off of that A.J. Derby fumble was really impressive series.
Yep.
So, yeah, the Chargers for some reason decided it would be a good idea to run the ball 4 straight times. I think it started like inside the 5-yard line, I want to say, after that long Hunter Henry reception.
And I thought it was interesting, too, how Anthony Lynn on 4th down was putting up his dukes, like flexing his arms, trying to say to the offensive line, come on, impose your will. And the Broncos stuffed him. And to your point, Todd Davis, he was tip of the spear.
Yeah, that's the second time Todd Davis has done that on 4th down with the Chargers this year. If you think back to the Monday night game where he stopped him at midfield, they just handed the ball off to Melvin Gordon, and Todd Davis was pretty much there as soon as the ball was in Melvin Gordon's face. So It's too bad that he's out because I think he's a real playmaker in the run game. And also he is one of the best Sacramento State Hornets of all time. So missing Todd, but it's almost hard to worry about the defense right now, given where things are on offense. Yeah. So I think they'll be okay with Zaire Anderson for the time being.
Yeah, I mean it is a blow. He's been their best, run stuffing linebacker. But I think if it's for a game, you hope they can get by. The downside is you're going against a phenom like Kareem Hunt. Now let's move on to Kevin Crumley at Crumley_Kevin on Twitter. His question: can we have a thorough, honest review of Lynch? Has anyone evaluated and given all objective facts? 2 to 3 year project? ? Now, Will, most scouts saw Lynch as a 2 or 3 year project, and we've seen that play out basically before our very eyes. Neither one of us are really the talent evaluator guys going through, the scout's eye type thing like our counterparts, Carl and Nick. But I will say this: I think up to this point, Lynch has pretty much lived up to most of the projections he received coming out of Memphis.
Yeah, so the book on Lynch was that he was going to be a 2 to 3 year project. And if you look at his tape from Memphis, you can just go on YouTube and look at his throws from whatever game you want. The offense that they ran is it's not even close to anything that you see in the NFL. It looks more like basketball almost than it does football. It's just he really truly was a point guard out there, distributing and getting quick passes off and really just doing some interesting stuff that works, I think, in Conference USA definitely, but isn't going to work in the NFL. But obviously he's got a great arm. I think his release is not quite where it should be right now. He throws off of his back foot a little bit more than I think anyone would like to see. But he's had good points in the NFL. Definitely that Tampa Bay game in the second half. I know Jake Marsing says that that's the best quarterbacked game by the Broncos in the last 2 years, but I don't know. I think that might be a little bit of hyperbole, although he was really good.
Trevor Siemian in Cincinnati was the best quarterbacking we've seen in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, well, I would even go to Trevor Siemian in the second half against Kansas City in that Sunday night loss.
I was thinking that too.
Mine.
But there were 2 that I can think of off the top of my head, just busted coverages that really helped him. I mean, and to his credit, he took advantage of them. You're supposed to take advantage of busted coverage, and he did. Yeah, I mean,
I got to give Trevor Siemian credit. Anytime you can run away from Justin Houston and go sideline to sideline and then throw a touchdown, I think you ought to be commended for that. But going back to Lynch, we saw a little bit of regression in the preseason, which I think was troublesome. But we have to remember, he's not I don't want to say that he's not intelligent, but he's certainly not Peyton Manning. I don't think he's Trevor Siemian as far as breaking down film, which is not necessarily the worst thing. Terry Bradshaw is one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game, and he's not, he's certainly not Peyton Manning in the film room. And I don't know if Ben Roethlisberger is either.
I was just going to bring that up.
Or any of those guys.
Ben Roethlisberger struggled quite a bit with the mental or intellectual aspects of playing quarterback in the NFL early on and had to lead with his physicality. And I think if Paxton Lynch is ever going to make it in the NFL, he's going to have to follow a similar suit because he has all the measurables that you look for. He has athletic explosion. I think really what we saw in the summer was a quarterback who just got into his own head. And until he just lets all that go, until he just dumps the expectations from inside the organization and outside from the fan base. I mean, the fan base has already dumped it, let's face it. By this point, the vast majority of fans have given up on Paxton Lynch. That's what I've seen. But if he just dumps that and just focuses on just going out there and playing football, I mean, and the Broncos structure something around him, I mean, he knows the playbook. That's the one thing that he has going for him is he's been there since day one with Mike McCoy. And Mike McCoy structured some plays for him during the preseason and training camp. They could wheel those back out, trot him back out, see what they could get out of him. But again, once you're looking at that right tackle situation being so porous, you wonder if it's just a matter of time before he re-sprains that same shoulder.
I mean, you talked about how fans have already written him off. It's way too early. Like he played 1 year when he was supposed to be a 2 to 3 year project. Let him be a 2 to 3 year project. He doesn't have to start right away. He came out of Memphis early. It's just gets another year, plays a couple seasons as this number 2 guy, gets a year under the McCoy system, assuming that they retain McCoy after this season. We'll see how that goes. But no, I don't put any credence into fans writing him off. I think NFL fans have about as many rational takes as like the Westboro Baptist Church right now. So especially this season for some, maybe it's just, the advent of Twitter has made those opinions more readily available, and certainly they have. But yeah, not seeing a ton of rational takes, especially when there's a little bit of losing going on, and the Broncos have lost 2 of their last or 3 of their last 4 games. Well, actually, go back to Buffalo. So
in their defense, the last 2 losses have been particularly crippling, humiliating type of losses. But let's move on because we're running a little bit long here. Last question. Coming from Justin Yates. His question is, people saying Oz wouldn't be better. How do you know he would not be? Remember when he took over in the toughest part of our season in 2015, which I think it is a great question because it's easy to dismiss Brock Osweiler because of the events of the last year and some change from the time he left Denver to his return. And I was just talking to someone else about this on Twitter. I do probably have a higher estimation of Brock Osweiler as a quarterback than a lot of guys, many of my peers. I am of the opinion that he still has something left in the tank and that it's not all over for him. I think when he does finally get an opportunity to play again, whether it's in Denver or elsewhere, I think he's going to do well. I think his experience in Houston, this is my opinion, was more of an outlier than the actual book on Osweiler because he stepped into just a strange confluence of circumstances, an awkward position on a team with a head coach who frankly didn't want him, and the two just butted heads throughout Osweiler's 1 season in Houston. And from there, the mountain of just that strange momentum built up and followed him to Cleveland after Houston basically traded him away in such an unprecedented fashion. And I look back at that Osweiler season of 2015, and I try to juxtapose that with some of the strain that he's gone through since and try and figure out what kind of player he has left in the tank. And the Broncos are trying to figure that out too. I mean, John Elway talked about him needing some TLC and some football rehab when they brought him back. But I do think he's a talented enough player that if given a chance to start, he might surprise some people in a second stint in Denver. Now, for you, Will, your answer to Justin, let's pretend Trevor Siemian doesn't exist. How do we know that Osweiler wouldn't be a better option at this point, based on what we saw at least from 2015, the last time he really suited up for the Broncos?
I mean, we don't know anything for sure at this point until he gets on the field. But I would point out that his main deficiency, I guess, in 2015, and you saw this a lot when they were losing. Like, think back to the first half of that Cincinnati Bengals game on Monday night. Was he was taking way too many sacks, and he was holding the ball for way too long. Granted, like Siemian now, the offensive line wasn't very good that season, but he wasn't doing them any favors either. So like I said earlier, his internal clock is not very good, and the more you get hit, the more messed up that clock gets. So I would say that I don't think that's gotten any better, especially based on his 2016 campaign in Houston. And I think one of the more understated aspects of kind of the rise and fall of Brock Osweiler is kind of just the public perception of him. And we like to think of athletes as people that can tune out criticism. Right,
impervious.
Right, but they're not. And especially, guys in their 20s like Brock Osweiler. Yep. I don't know how I would handle being made fun of on the internet and, on ESPN and
constant meme.
The Houston Chronicle. Yeah, every day for a year. And granted, he brought some of that on himself for choosing to go to Houston in free agency.
And choosing to skip the White House visit and all that.
Right. So he's not, it's not like all this was forced on him and he's making millions of dollars. So I don't feel bad for him in the grand scope of things. But it's easy to see how he would have lost his confidence. And confidence at quarterback, it's like confidence when you're playing kicker. Like, you need mechanics, but you also need, the expectation that when you throw the ball, good things are going to happen.
Yep.
And I think Brock Osweiler lost that somewhere along the way. And we saw, and he spent, I don't know, it's just kind of the kiss of death when you get cut by the Cleveland Browns and, they don't even want you. He got traded he was the first player to be traded along with a pick for cash considerations in the NFL. That's an NBA thing. And the Houston Texans dumped, I think, what was it, a second-round pick?
Second-round pick and a fourth or fifth-round pick later on.
Yeah, so that's a lot to get rid of his contract. That can't be a good feeling to know that teams are offloading high draft picks, an early day 2 draft pick, just to get you off their team and get the contract off of the books and send you to the Cleveland Browns, which is, notoriously been the factory of sadness since they came back to the NFL in 1999.
Well, in confidence, it is something that is absolutely requisite to play NFL quarterback. And yeah. I wrote about that also today at milehighhuddle.com in this piece. I did pros and cons on Siemian, benching Siemian for Osweiler. I think, though, that there is some kind of confidence. Here's a silver lining that a guy like Osweiler can take. Now, if he ends up getting called upon, here's the upside. He can take some confidence in getting another opportunity to play for the very same team that drafted him, the very same team that loved him, the very same team that believed in him, the same team who wanted him to be a franchise quarterback for them, and the same team in which he had the only success, I shouldn't say the only, the greatest success, I think, in his young career. So if confidence is key in a quarterback, which it is, I think that part of that TLC and the football rehab in which the Broncos are giving him is helping to build up that confidence. And I honestly do think if Osweiler does get a chance this year for the Broncos, I do think people are going to be surprised. And, Will, you might disagree with me on that. And there's really no empirical evidence to back up what I'm saying. It's just kind of a gut thing, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I would ultimately defer to the coaches on that one just because they see him in practice and they've got plenty of tape on him to the point where if they really think he's going to help the team win, they'll put him in. I don't know if it's about winning in the short term because I don't think Brock Osweiler is a long-term answer for anybody at this point. So if you're giving up on Trevor Siemian and you're pulling the plug, you might as well go to Paxton Lynch and see if you have something long-term. I don't personally think that it's there at this point, and I don't know if it's ever going to be. I've kind of changed my tune on Lynch since he was drafted, which is weird because I was kind of one of the Lynch guys heading into the 2016 season, and I was very skeptical of Trevor Siemian. And how the turntables.
how the Will went hook, line, and sinker for the one they call Treasure Siemian.
Yeah, I mean, it's something about him. Maybe it's just his face. I don't know. It's just a Northwestern thing. He's just got something about him that's just very endearing. So
I think, honestly, for guys like you, that kind of, I'll just, don't get butthurt over this. I just mean like Trevor Siemian apologist, let's say. Okay,
sure.
And I found myself in this exact same mindset at times. Often is we have a natural penchant for rooting for the underdogs, and that's what Trevor Siemian has been ever since he came into the league. I mean, he was a 7th-round pick that shouldn't have even been drafted, but he was. Against all odds, he found a way to stick on a roster with 2 very good quarterbacks as a rookie, and when given a chance to really compete for a job, he put a stranglehold on it. And, it's fun, and it's easy to root for guys like that. And I think the big point of demarcation right now between you and I and the way we view this situation is that there comes a point where you got to face reality. And right now, if the Broncos don't find a way to make a change and create some kind of a spark, the season's going to be over before they know it, and they wasted yet another opportunity to see what they had in a first-round draft pick, now 2 seasons old.
Right. So, yeah, and to be clear, I'm not advocating not upgrading the quarterback position in the offseason. I think that's a very good, question that we'll get to, and definitely Carl and Nick are probably already talking about to each other. But no, if you can get a guy like, I don't know, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, what have you. I know everybody's big on Baker Mayfield and Mason Rudolph these days. They're not really my guys. I'm more in that Darnold Rosen camp. Lamar Jackson, I have no idea what to think. Josh Allen, I think, is Jay Cutler 2.0, and I don't think they're going to get Drew Brees either. So I'm talking about the 2017 Broncos, and all of my Trevor Siemian apology is couched in the context of the regular season right now. I always think that if you can upgrade, you should do that, especially at the quarterback position. I don't know if they're going to have the chance to in the draft. I don't know if Elway's going to be aggressive enough.
Yeah.
Maybe he will, and maybe it's worth it. It's certainly scary when you're mortgaging the future of the team on a guy who is unknown. But that's a question that we'll have to get to later. But, it's worth clarifying that, we're talking about the context of, the first half of the 2016 season for the 2017 season for the 3-3 Denver Broncos.
Yep. Well, it's been a good podcast, good episode. Thanks, everybody, for the questions. We'll hit you up on the other side following the Week 8 game against the Kansas City Chiefs, and that episode will be the 100th in the history of the Huddle Up podcast. So we'll try.
Oh, yeah.
Will and I think it's something special to do for that episode. But before we get out of here, we also want to say thank you to our sponsor, Audible. Guys, go get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. You get over 180,000 different titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. It's a great way to support us. We work really hard to bring you this podcast each and every week, and we need your support in more ways than just listening. By this point, you're listening to this show, you're a loyal listener, you're subscribing. This is a great way to support the show and our efforts. Plus, it's a service, I'm telling you, is awesome. You're listening to podcasts because obviously you enjoy the audio medium. And with Audible, you get to listen to books. Maybe you don't always have time to sit down, turn the pages, but it gives you an opportunity to listen to very well-produced and crafted audiobooks. And you get a free book. If you don't like it after 30 days, you cancel. So go to audibletrial.com/huddleup. Give it a shot. Now, that's all the time we have for today. You can find Will in the Twitterverse at WillKeys6, myself at Chad and Jensen. Continue to tweet us your questions, and we'll try to address your concerns on the show. Look for Nick and Carl's preview of the Chiefs game by Thursday morning. And don't forget to subscribe, y'all. For Will, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.